Want more than just the headlines? Find out what's going on and what it means with me, Dennis Prager, this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. You want a case study in socialism since we have candidates running as socialists in this country. We have candidates on the Chicago City Council, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, who refer to them as socialists. We have others who are socialists who refer to themselves as progressives.
Yeah, that's the other one.
We have
Maya Pawar the other day. I was talking to him. He goes, "Well, I'm a progressive."
Yeah, you're socialist.
Like, yeah, you're a socialist.
and we have a lot of people self-identify as socialists increasingly. Think about what's happening on college campuses. So here's a case study in real time of socialism, and this excellent piece. It's a long read in the Journal over the weekend. The Tragedy of Venezuela. Anatoly Kurmaniev, if I'm pronouncing his name right, has spent the last 5 years in Venezuela. And he compares it to the post-Soviet meltdown, saying Venezuela's collapse has been far worse than the chaos I experienced in the post-Soviet meltdown. Listen to what's happened in the 5 years since he's been there. And he gives vivid descriptions of the reality on the ground, but this is the macroeconomic data. 2013 was the last year that Venezuela's economy would grow. You know, that was the heady days of $100 a barrel oil and so forth. By the end of 2018, Venezuela's economy will have shrunk by an estimated 35% since 13. The steepest contraction in the country's 200-year history, the deepest recession anywhere in the world in decades. From 14 to 17, the poverty rate rose from 48% to 87%.
Oh, my gosh.
9 out of 10 Venezuelans don't earn enough to meet basic needs. Children die from malnutrition and medicine shortages. An estimated 3 million Venezuelans, which is 10% of the population, have left the country in the last 2 decades of socialist rule. He talks about one coastal town that used to host the central bank party that's now largely empty, like the rest of Venezuela. Its once popular beach littered with garbage and empty even on weekends. The stalls that sold rum cocktails and fried corn pastries are closed. Extreme poverty in Venezuela has risen so steeply that it has become common to see people searching for food residues in garbage, like pictured in the capital in Caracas. The speed of collapse has transformed the lives of millions of Venezuelans almost overnight. And this is...
We did stories here where people are trying to kill rats and squirrels to eat as food. They couldn't even find that.
Yeah, trying to jumpstart ride-sharing services as a way to again, earn the money that you need just to survive.
And then the socialist Maduro wins again, which is, that's a joke. That was a joke election.
Well, right. It was an election where he had no opposition. It was boycotted by the opposition because it was illegitimate. It was fraudulent.
Right. And if you disagreed with Maduro or you were considered a political, well, they'll throw you in prison as a political prisoner.
Yeah. He writes, does the Wall Street Journal reporter, as sluggish voting drew to a close, a smiling and confident Maduro posted a video of himself waving not to throngs of adoring supporters, but to a largely empty public square. It was a fitting metaphor for the 5 years I've spent reporting from this country, which is now ending as he begins another assignment. But this is great reporting. This is not
That's
fake
a well-written
news.
article.
This is the kind of reporting that journalists should do, and then think about what the policies we're embracing here. Think about how so many of us are embracing policies that kill entrepreneurship, the golden goose. This is the kind of stuff that can happen anywhere but Venezuela, or anywhere but somewhere else. Wrong.
And speaking of Venezuela, we should give kudos to President Trump because over the weekend, he and Senator Corker actually went to Venezuela and freed Josh Halt and his wife. They were wrongly imprisoned. And Josh Halt had a cell phone, and he was live streaming from the prison when they had a riot and said, "They're coming to kill me. Can you please help me get out of here?" And that was accomplished this weekend.
For more on this topic and other things related to economic policy in this country, we're pleased to be joined by Jim Iuorio, our friend and CNBC contributor and entrepreneur in his own right. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, what about that? I mean, just trying to take examples of, tragic examples, bad examples, the way that states around us use Illinois as the bad example, say don't do what they're doing. That's the bad example. There are lessons to be learned from the bad examples too.
But history is 100% clear on where socialism ends up, and it ends up with the boat hitting the rocks, with people struggling to find rats to eat. This is not, Venezuela is not, any specific sort of story. This is where it ends. That's why it's just so sad that the just blatant ignoring of any historical fact. But what's ironic today is that we're talking about Venezuela at the same time that the European experiment, and Europe is just socialism light, which is where we were headed to over the last 10 or 12 years. Venezuela obviously took it a little bit further, but socialism usually goes on a linear path. And once you get a lot of people who are on the public dole, they tend to like that. Guess what? It's Finland just tried that experiment where they gave it universal basic income, I believe is what it's called. And guess what happened? Entrepreneurship, hard work, that kind of went out the window throughout the experiment. So it's amazing. But when you bring it back to Illinois, something very interesting happened last week as well. The Federal Reserve came out and said, I'm paraphrasing, we are willing to accept a little bit of inflation or letting the economy ride a little bit hot before we tighten too much. I viewed that as a specific tip of the cap to places like Illinois, which need low borrowing costs, or else we're going to come off the rails. Now, what they're saying is we're going to give you some extra time to fix your problems. They don't have the view and the angle that we do here, and we don't have the confidence that Illinois is going to fix their problems. They're just going to take the freebie of low borrowing costs and probably continue the same bad habits that they have. But everything of this is tied together: Venezuela, Europe, Illinois, and even America as well.
Well, what about, I know, just on a separate issue, mortgage rates? They seem to be going up and up, and what's going on there, and why is it happening?
Well, rates in general are going up, and when Donald Trump took office, the Fed had kept rates at pretty much zero for, let's call it, 9 years. Okay. Now, they anticipated that Hillary Clinton was going to be president, and then they started to, it's their dot plot they call it, the Fed, is where rates are going to be going further out. And Hillary Clinton was obviously going to be a far better macroeconomic president than Barack Obama, which is not saying much, by the way. And all of a sudden, when Donald Trump wins, they're like, okay, well, we're going to have some deregulation and have some better tax reform where companies can actually make money in this country. This is the time to let rates go higher. And they hoped that having mortgage rates go higher too would the economic activity that was going to be caused by deregulation and tax reform was going to be enough to support the housing market even with higher rates. And by the way, I believe that they're right, and they continue to be right.
What about just thinking again, kind of macroeconomic impacts? There's a lot of skittishness about the next year in particular. You've got some analysts suggesting that we're nearing a recession. Concerns about Trump's saber-rattling protectionist policies, as well as that report that came out from Goldman Sachs, of all people, but warning about the accumulation of debt and deficits for years to come. How much stock do you put in some of the bearish projections?
Some. I think what we're doing here is a historic pivot, like I said, from the more socialism light policies to socialism extra light, which is what we're in now. And this is going to be a difficult thing. We had a stock market and asset prices, you mentioned mortgages. Let's just say housing prices, stock prices, all were a reflection of zero interest rates for very, very long periods of time. When we're going to a more organic sort of rate policy, all these things have to adjust, and the adjustment within those things, sure, they can cause recessions. I don't see it now. We just saw an earnings season that was pretty much blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
The earnings growth was up almost 24%. Revenue growth was up almost 8%. The economic data that's coming out is good here. So we're looking overseas to Venezuela and Europe, and this morning the market is very concentrated in Europe. That's why the stock market is down today, because Italian yields have shot through the roof. So, but if we take our vision and just look here, things are going pretty well. And with the addition of Larry Kudlow, as who I worked with at CNBC for years as the NAC director, he's a pro-growth guy, and I think they're taking the right steps to fix our problems here.
What is it that concerns you as you kind of look ahead? Is it re-blowing up the housing bubble? Is it pension debt? Is it student loan debt? Is it something else?
No, it's definitely pensions, and it's two things. It's pensions and it's zombie companies that should have declared bankruptcy sometime over the last 8 to 10 years, but they didn't because they found ever cheaper places to borrow. Think of it this way: is that Italy, people were lending Italy money over the last few years. Now, if you know anything about Europe, the marriage between Germany and Italy is not going to work forever. Let's just say my Italian brothers, they are very serious about their leisure times. They're not exactly the most productive. They're not exactly the most productive country in the world. So people were lending them money because there was no place else to lend it. When the Fed keeps rates so low for so long, they push people out the risk spectrum, and people are lending Illinois money. People bent over backwards 2 weeks ago to lend Illinois 10-year money at 4.88. That's crazy to me. Illinois has a chance of not paying you back in the long run. So yeah, pensions and companies that should have declared bankruptcies and that process being hastened by higher rates, those worry me.
And what about the trade war threat?
I don't believe it for 1 second. It never worries me a second. I think that Donald Trump and Larry Kudlow are both very much into free and fair trade, and the threats that they use, which some people get confused by this, the protectionist threats they use are all with the end game of achieving freer and fairer trade, and I think they'll win that. I don't think for 2 seconds about trade wars.
Do you think that we do enough? This is sort of a philosophical question, or how you observe things. Do we do enough, just thinking about Venezuela, to promote entrepreneurship in this country? I mean, outside of Silicon Valley and sort of the sexy companies for the snot-nosed kids, the coders and stuff. I was just was looking at something Mark Perry posted over the weekend in his Carpe Diem blog. 53 U.S. companies have been on the Fortune 500 since 1955. So just about 1 in 10 are still there 60 years after they appeared, 1955 to 2018, which is, of course, a testament to creative destruction. The biggest of the big can go away or certainly decline. Not everything is always going forward. Not everything is progressing. Not everything is growing. That competition produces better goods and services at lower cost and a better quality of life. And it's the productive, risk-taking entrepreneur who's central to that. And is that person as elevated, as talked about in our conversations about public policy as they should be?
As a matter of fact, the opposite is true. I think that entrepreneurship in this country is really almost, when you think of the regulation and the tax burdens, and I know we've gotten a lot better since this first round, but we have to deal here with regulations and taxes from the federal government, the state government, the county, local municipalities. Anytime that you start, and believe me, I know this firsthand within the restaurant business, it's almost comical when they come down and try to take the money from you. It's like you and I do think in the restaurant business or any cash business, they think their perception, the government is the they here, is that people cheat in cash businesses, so we better get them on the back end, which is the stupidest policy I've ever heard, in that they then, of course, provide incentive for people to actually pocket cash, which is silly. But as far as entrepreneurship goes in general, I think it's nowhere even close in this country to promoting it the way it should be.
He is Jim Iuorio. He's a CNBC contributor. He also almost did a shameless plug, but he pulled up short. So I want to give you the opportunity to do so. Almost, the Branson Palatine.
Yes, I never normally drop the ball like that. It's Branson Palatine, finest hamburger in the Chicago area.
There you go. Jim Iuorio, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro